It has stood the test of time. God's book, the Bible, still relevant in today's complex world. It is written, sharing messages of hope around the world.
Thank you for joining us on It Is Written Canada. We are visiting Pugwash, Nova Scotia, and if you've never been here, this is a place that you need to put on your bucket list. Beautiful beaches, beautiful shoreline right here along Canada's Atlantic coast. There was a speaker I used to listen to. His name was Morris Venden. And as a young man, he really spoke to my heart, and he made the gospel clear, very precise, and very practical. And I remember struggling, kind of feeling like a yo-yo Christian. My Christianity was up and down, and never just steady, and living it as a lifestyle that was a connection with God that I really wanted. And there was something about Morris Venden speaking that just really spoke to me personally and very clearly. And someone gave me a tape back in the days when people used to listen to cassette tapes, and I would listen to it in the car, and it really spoke to my heart. And today we have the privilege of having with us Lee Venden, his son, who is an international speaker with his wife Margie, and they travel around and share the gospel and really are revivalists. So Lee, thank you for being here with us. Mm-hmm. And we just want to talk about yourself and what you're doing, and also your father, and how Morris Venden really made an impact on so many people, and how did that work?
Well, I know he also made a very amazing impact in my life. And I remember listening to one of his talks, and he mentioned earlier on in his ministry that he had some struggles as a young pastor. Can you tell us about those?
Actually, my father grew up in a Christian household. His father was a pastor, his uncle was a pastor, his brother became a pastor, his cousins were pastors, and he involved himself in Christian education all the way through his learning years and so on. And then after he got married and started having a family of his own, he himself was a pastor. But at the age of 28, he was struggling with bleeding ulcers. And it's kind of unusual to have stress in your life at that early age that would cause such a condition, but it was true. And then the reason he had them was because as a pastor, I guess you could say it this way, he knew a lot of biblical knowledge, had a lot of Bible information, and he could preach doctrinal sermons and so on, but he didn't know Jesus for himself. And at the end of each sermon, when he was greeting the parishioners in the foyer afterwards, there was a little woman with white hair that would shake his hand, and she would say, "That was a fine sermon, Pastor Venden. It will be even better when you know Jesus for yourself."
Wow.
And it bothered him that she could tell.
It would bother me. Did she mean it? I just want to...
She was a kind person.
Yeah.
She wasn't being malicious or vindictive or anything, but my dad was struggled with that, and he it bothered him that it showed.
It showed, yeah. She saw through.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, wow, people are seeing this.
Yeah, and I think that dichotomy of trying to be a pastor and pretend to talk about someone you don't really know, as though you do, at least for my dad and his particular conscience and the way he was hardwired, that was a disconnect that he couldn't keep living with.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and so he came to a point where he decided he was going to give it up, but before giving it up, it was right that time they were in Oregon, the state of Oregon in the U.S., and they were having what is called a camp meeting, kind of a convocation rally, kind of a camp meeting thing. And all the pastors in that region were called in to set things up in advance, camp pitch they called it. And so my dad thought, maybe I can sneak in some counsel without anybody realizing that I'm the needy, customer. And so while he's pitching tents with another pastor, he says to that guy, if one of your church members was to ask you, how do I really become and remain a Christian?
So he was actually asking that for himself.
Exactly. It was his question. He hoped they didn't catch on. But he said, if they asked you, how do I become and remain a Christian? What do you tell them?
Yeah.
And of course, he's all ears. And the pastor that he asked the first question to said, well, I tell him it's very simple. You just need to give your heart to the Lord. And my dad was like, thank you very much. I have no idea what that means. Give your heart to the Lord. It's a phrase that Christians throw around a lot.
Yes.
But to really get practical, how do you give your heart to the Lord?
Right.
It's intangible, vague.
It's intangible. You can't give your physical heart to the Lord.
Obviously not going to do that.
No.
Yeah. So he didn't, he's like, thank you very much. He worked with another pastor an hour or two later in the day, and he thought, well, I'll try it on him. So he said, if someone in your congregation asks you, how do you really give your heart to the Lord? What do you say? And that guy said, well, I tell them that what that really means is that you surrender all to Jesus. And of course, once again, we have a vague answer.
Sure.
How do you surrender all to Jesus? Do you just sing that song in the hymnal, I surrender all, and now you're good to go?
Sure. And he grew up as a Christian, and so he had heard that phrase before. So he was asking for something a lot deeper.
Yeah. So he asked another pastor, and this happened all afternoon. And I think he went through like a half a dozen pastors, and the answers he gave included fall on the rock and be broken, behold the Lamb, use the eye of faith, all kinds of stuff. Every answer was vague and intangible. And he went home from that camp meeting really discouraged because he thought, if my own peers can't tell me how to have a close walk with Jesus, where am I going to find it? And he sat down and wrote a letter of resignation from the ministry to send to his boss.
Because he was feeling more discouraged than when he first started asking the questions.
Worse, he was worse. I think he said it this way, the latter state of that man was worse than the first, which was a quote from Jesus,
Yes.
And so then, but before he mailed the letter that he had written, I guess I would say it was the Holy Spirit impressed him. And maybe he should try reading a little book. It was a pamphlet, not very long, pretty short read, but it had a title line that sort of spoke to his question. The title was Steps to Christ. And he thought, maybe if I read that book, I might get some insight. So he read the book, and he found out that, in that book anyway, that there's like this overarching agenda or goal or objective that God has for each of us, which is to have a meaningful, personal, intimate, ongoing, one-on-one relationship with us. One-on-one.